As you meditate, make sure that the body is relaxed, the back is straight, and give permission to the muscles to relax and soften. Release any knots. And take 3 very deep breaths, and with each out-breath, breathe away any stress. And with each in-breath, breathe in peace and serenity. Sit in such a way that you can forget about the body and focus on the pure consciousness that you are. Give the body's metabolism permission to slow down. And as the breathing gets very slow, notice how at the end of each out-breath there's a period of no movement before the next in-breath. And this is a very deep moment in which you can settle into an ever deeper level of consciousness, in more stillness, silence, peace, and presence. And as you do this, the mind will automatically slow down, and the space between thoughts will reveal the inner illumination the inner presence of the shining self, deeper within than the ego or even the soul. And so use this meditation to allow yourself to reach that deepest level of consciousness, the core, the heart, the foundation, the source of your being. Enter deeply into the stillness of no thought. Of pure presence beyond time. Beyond identity. Enter into the emptiness of the formless, uncreated self. The emptiness that is neither being nor non-being. The emptiness that is also fullness. And in the silence of presence, there will be a sensitivity to the most subtle vibrations, the most subtle levels of Shakti that pour in from the absolute into the phenomenal, from the transcendent into the immanent. And bring the state of grace, of divine love, contentment, fulfillment, and realization of what you are. Notice whatever phenomena arise without thinking, without analyzing, without questioning. Whether you notice the heart opening and feeling immense love for all that is, for the source of all that is. Or perhaps you sense the third eye opening, the light shining in the center of the brain, sending messages of intense, devotional, and wise understandings of life, of reality, of truth throughout your being, connecting you with the source. At every level of the being, from the cells to the soul, to the pure spirit, and to the absolute. And perhaps you feel and sense and experience and imperience the crown chakra opening, the 1,000-petaled lotus, the peacock throne, the lotus throne of the blissful self. And feel your connection to the cosmos and the intelligence that is the creative dreamer of the universe as yourself. the self that is one, supreme, alone, formless, bodiless, qualityless, non-objective, non-graspable, undefinable, indescribable, and yet completely palpable as the luminous, blissful power from which all unfolds. Thou art that. Merge into that. Surrender to that. Dissolve into that. Realize you are that. There is only the I, the one self. And all the rest is appearance, illusion, Maya, and yet all the illusion is only within the self. And in the present moment, in the now, there is total freedom. Total ability to choose liberation from the illusion and return to the source. Total freedom. To be the self. And there is total freedom to live the paradox. To be in the world of multiplicity, but not of it. realize the uncanny unity within the duality. And the beauty, the joy, the laughter, the ecstasy of knowing the truth within the illusion. But not in bondage to the illusion. Beyond desire and fear, beyond identification and projection. Beyond all beliefs. To abide as the supreme intelligence, love, will, and light. As a gift to the world, as a server of the world, as a guide. As a lighthouse. As a source of strength and wisdom. As an egoless manifestation of the One. You are that. Gradually bring your attention back into the physical plane, the hologram, the matrix, but in a state of freedom, detachment, purity of heart, sattvic clarity of mind, generosity of spirit, and union with the Supreme One. Enter back into the physical and the mental vehicles, but without identification, without confusion, without loss of clarity, in total coherence. In total self-knowledge. And remain connected to the source of being so that the energy, the prana, the life energy flows through the body and the clarity of mind fills the buddhi with light. And the power of will overcomes all resistances of ego or of maya, and the self shines within the body and transmits energy beyond to infinity without boundaries, without otherness. In the purity, the innocence, and the sublime love that unites us all as one. Parameshvaraya. Parabrahman, Parashakti. Namah Shivaya. Om. Shivoham. Aham, aham. Satchitananda Swarup. Om. Tat. Sat. Namaste. We have the joyous opportunity today and the privilege of being able to connect with our extended Sangha, who may be watching this on various screens around the world in different places, along with the Sangha who sustains the local space of the ashram. And we are able to create a unified field, an energy field that unites us all at the same wavelength, the same vibrational frequency, that now has a global reach and is able to impact the noosphere of our planet, and to act as a superorganism of coherence, intelligence, love, and wisdom that can be disseminated and transmitted to all the souls, wherever they may be on the planet, who need support, help, hope, light, the power of love, of spirit, of the miraculous, who can tap into these energies if they are seeking with a sincere heart to be able to overcome whatever obstacles they face in life. And so may we use this opportunity to send blessings to all of those who need such help, all who are suffering. And for those who have gone beyond suffering and are overflowing with joy and with love and with spiritual power, may you give generously to that energy field that is connecting us with all beings, with all nature, with the cosmos itself as a single energetic intelligence, manifesting as our world, and giving us the opportunity to bring down into this holographic field the power of truth and love that has been lacking, that can restore nature's equilibrium and wisdom and guidance from that source that is able to create a new order that can function to return our planet to a place of peace. A satsang is a ceremony, a ritual, in which we attune ourselves to the highest vibrational frequency of the Supreme Intelligence, who guides the destiny of the planet and the universe itself. And we have the God-given ability to tune in to that highest frequency simply by letting go of all the lower frequencies that come with identification with body or ego mind. Let us take advantage of the freedom to tune into the highest self, the unborn self, the consciousness that you are, that knows it is not the body, that knows yourself as pure presence, as unborn and deathless. and as filled with light and love and peace, always unchanging, eternal, so that we can bring this peace as a gift to all those who are peaceless. But we must be willing to tune in. We must be willing to let go. We must be willing to surrender to our highest self. And if we do that, we are assured of receiving the grace of a connection that will transform our lives forever. If only we are humble enough and wise enough and courageous enough to take the leap into the unknown and to trust that that ultimate consciousness that is infinite is also absolutely benevolent, that has our highest and best interest at heart, far beyond what our own ego has, and with far greater intelligence to guide our steps, to form our words, to grant us the grace of living a life that is impeccable and incorruptible and free of karmic backlash, free of suffering. And that enables us to continually grow into ever higher levels of realization of that infinity which has no end, no beginning, no limit. In the ancient days when humans were more in touch with the divine, in those days of the first satsangs, the ones led by Shunyamurti, the original founder of all the schools of yoga that have come after, the satsangs were held completely in silence, because the power of that being to connect beyond words, beyond thought, and to transmit and to stabilize the energy field of presence was so strong that words were not necessary. No questions could even arise in one's heart because one was so full with the bliss of the presence of the supreme power. Now at the end of Kali Yuga, there are many questions, many doubts, many conflicts. And so the satsang must come in the form of a discussion, an opening of the mind as well as the heart, so that the deepest questions, the deepest obstacles, the deepest fixations of the mind that prevent release into the unlimited can be helped to be released, so that the mind can become free of the bondages to fear and desire, to ego, to attachment, and to all the other vices that come with identification with a mortal body, and all of the dependencies and all of the confusions that come with the ego, all the distrust, the paranoia, the conflicts that get projected onto others, that every ego suffers from. And thus we must start from where the consciousness is, and hope that the process itself of attuning to a higher understanding of what is real will enable the vibrational frequencies of all to gradually or quickly attune to that level in which all answers are provided instantaneously within. And the power of pure being is able to dissolve the delusional identifications and dissociations and fragmentations of consciousness, so that with a reunified mind integrated with the heart and the power of will, one's life can be liberated so that the highest potentialities can manifest, and one can live in a flow state of joy and beauty without glitches, without suffering, without error, and live with that accuracy of the famous arrow that is shot by Arjun, the warrior, into the bullseye of God consciousness, and remain forever centered in that supreme point of light, which is the portal to the Supreme Presence, and abide in that state of being that is eternal throughout all the changes of time and all of the movements in space that bring about unprecedented and radical changes on our earth, that is giving birth to a new age and a new level of consciousness, a new humanity. And we are given the opportunity to be divinized by that power and to function as those who become bringers of the new dawn. May we accept what is being offered and internalize that power of presence. So that the flow of that energy and all of its astonishing ways of manifesting its creative intelligence can become free to show all of its potentialities in the performance of one's sacred existence. So the floor is open for all who are present in local space and those who are in cyberspace to ask whatever questions you may have or offer whatever comments you wish and share anything that is relevant to and assisting in the upliftment of consciousness for all. So, floor is open.
Thank you, Shunya. Our first question comes from one of our member section subscribers. His name is Billy Smith. And he asks, how do we let go of all self-images and representations?
That's an easy one, Billy. Just realize that all of those representations are objects in your mind, and you are not the object, but the subject. And simply by disidentifying with those objects and realizing you are the creator of those objects, you can empty the mind of them and feel the greater spaciousness, the greater joy, the greater power of creativity that comes when there is no identification with objects that limit one's frame of reference and one's power of creativity. And so by turning the attention inward, away from the objects, into the source of subjectivity, one discovers a self that is disembodied, that is not produced by the neurons of the brain, that is not something that can be grasped by logic or scientific reasoning, but that presence which is so infinite, so beyond, that the consciousness that had been identified with something finite dissolves into that infinite space very easily and merges into the blissful presence that shines within. And once one is saturated with that luminous and blissful love that is the real self, one will never return to identification with a mere image or thought, and will live one's life from this state of pure freedom and infinite surprise, infinite recognition of the new that comes from within, that cannot be predicted or limited or known before it manifests in its fullness. And it is this source of all of the seeds of creation that brings the ultimate fulfillment and completion of our destiny. There are no obstacles when the desire to transcend the thought level and the level of self-images is wholehearted. I hope that is of help.
Thank you for the teaching. I believe you said something like, after you spoke about Dr. Shunyamurti, you spoke about starting where consciousness is at, or starting where one is at. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means? Because the ego is so blind to itself, how does it even know where it's at? And just what does that mean?
Well, the ego doesn't know where it's at. That's where it's at. And that's the problem. Now, we are in a different level of consciousness at the end of Kali Yuga than we were in the beginning of Kali Yuga, or even Dwapar Yuga before Kali Yuga, which was much higher. And so, because we are at a lower frequency of consciousness, we have fallen, most have at least, into a state of identification with the bodily organism and with the mind that, and its identifications that we received in infancy, in childhood. And because this society and culture offers no rite of passage in which we go through ego death and there is a rebirth and a completion of a vision quest that enables us to receive the understanding of our mission and our destiny and our true nature, because most of us have not gone through such rites of passage, we are still living with an ego mind that has sedimented many layers since infancy to adulthood, but in which none of those lower layers have been dissolved. They're still there, And so one is prone to falling into those lower, more primitive states of infantile consciousness and having meltdowns, temper tantrums, collapses, right? All of that. And all of the sedimentary levels in between that tend to create differential understandings of reality that bring about confusion in one's mind. I'm not sure, is it this or that? Do I want this or that? One part wants this, another part wants that, right? One part wants an ice cream cone, another wants a shot of whiskey, another wants ayahuasca, another wants liberation without needing anything. Every section and segment of consciousness has a different orientation and a different frame of reference. So it is within this confusion of tongues that is internal and external. There is no cultural connectivity and no ability to communicate either internally with ourself because of the fragmentation, or with the other, or know what the other means by what they say. And so it is in this confusion that we have to start with first principles and reach, well, what can we know for sure? And build up, very much in the way that René Descartes did in the 1600s, a new foundation for philosophy and for ethics and for living one's life. And it can only come about through a coherent understanding of what cannot be denied. And so what we must offer are those kinds of understandings that attract the mind because it can taste the energies that come from love, and because the mind and the heart are aching for love that they never got, or that got cut, or that was conditional, and the being never got seen, never got recognized, never was encouraged to grow. There is a natural hunger and thirst for this kind of growth and the nourishment of the information and the energy, but also a fear of it and a suspicion and a terror of being exploited or abused, as one probably was in the past. And so because of all of this ambivalence about whether even to trust that they can take a step into the unknown and will be guided and held and contained and not judged or not abandoned, the ability for one to make a commitment to a spiritual life beyond the ego defenses has almost been lost. And therefore, an energy field in which that trust can be regained through the recognition that this context that we are in is universal. It doesn't belong to one or two. This is the condition we find ourselves in, and yet in which the urgency then to create community and an energy field in which we can be supported and nourished is of utmost urgency because of its life or death for us and for our planet. And so it is a moment in which the soul is being tested, and those famous scales in the Egyptian pyramids, and one's heart has to be lighter than a feather in order to avoid the destruction of the crocodile demon that will take one if one identifies with the heaviness of one's past traumas and holds on to the hatred, the fear, the distrust, and all of that. So everyone wants to lighten up and to be free of that density from which they are suffering, but they have to dare to do it. And so it's easier if they're in a congregation of beings who are doing it together and can thus feel they're not mad and they're not in a danger zone, and that it is indeed not only safe, but there is an internal calling that one can hear within that says, yes, let go, relax, discover who you are, and put down the shields and the sword and the sidearms and see what is real in a new way, with eyes open to a deeper level of reality than you have wanted to pay attention to, both within and without. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shunya, we have a question that's very timely in the sense that it's related to a retreat we have coming up in September on white magic. It comes from Kieran Perez, who asks, what is the value of developing cities? Do you believe the highest cities are possible?
Okay, this is an interesting question. I'm glad it's asked because there's a lot of confusion. This subject of cities. Sri Ramana was once asked about jnanis, and he said, actually, there are no jnanis. There's only jnana. The idea that there are jnanis, meaning ones who know, ones who have achieved the supreme knowledge, are in some special category. And Ramana said, no, that supreme knowledge is in fact the knowledge that you are not separate or special or different. You don't even exist as an individual. What exists is the knowledge itself. So I would apply that also to siddhis and to siddhas, which is the noun of, in this case, in the opposite way of the jnani and the jnana. The siddha is one who has the siddhis. But I would say there are no siddhas. There is only siddha itself. Now, siddha and siddhi, they have two different meanings, which are interesting. One meaning of siddhi is a power, usually a supernormal power, at least from the perspective of a non-yogi, that is able to be wielded by an individual. But the other meaning of siddhi is perfection. And it is that level of consciousness that has perfected itself. And that perfection means the consciousness has merged with the infinite. There is no longer a separate individual functioning in some separate way from the cosmic consciousness. So the dissolving of the individual as a siddha is what brings the perfection. And it is that cosmic consciousness that produces the so-called siddhis. The preliminary way in which the capacity for, let's say, manifesting an energy field in which siddhis seem to appear, the first way it will appear is as synchronicities. Right? Because a synchronicity means something is happening that is magical, right? That is out of the ordinary. That's not just a mere coincidence, and yet it couldn't have been planned, it couldn't have been caused in normal ways. Something choreographed it, right, from a different level of consciousness than an individual. And so it is, as one is rising in consciousness, one will discover that more and more synchronicities happen. And some of those synchronicities will happen not even locally. There will be people who you're thinking of and suddenly they'll call on the phone. Now, was that a siddhi? Did you cause them to call? No, but there was a synchronicity of the two, you see. And really all siddhis are advanced levels of synchronicity that is being promulgated by the cosmic consciousness that's really the puppeteer that's playing all the puppets on the phenomenal plane level. So that perfection that is attained is simply a resonance with that, so that one's in on the joke. But the one who's telling the joke is not an individual. It's that cosmic consciousness itself that is providing through joy, through the laughter, through the goodness that is able to emerge in non-ordinary ways to relieve suffering and to bring about insights and realizations and liberations that could not occur through any logical means or scientific process, and proves that there is a power that transcends our ability to grasp through an understanding of natural law, quote unquote, at whatever level science is claiming that laws work, without usually asking, well, who made those laws, why are they working, and in what way has this universe come together such that it is governed by higher law. There must be a lawgiver, there must be an ordainer. Science won't go there, but more and more, I have seen, even in just recent months, the waning of the materialist paradigm, even in scientific circles, has become very extreme. And I would even say that the paradigm of idealism, that consciousness is not only primary, but is the actual constituent energy that forms what has been called matter. But there is no matter. There is really only consciousness, in which there are appearances of what can be called material. But the world is purely consciousness. And this is becoming now science, because through all of the understandings of quantum physics and complexity theory, and the failure of Darwinian evolution to prove its case, and all of the other insights and failures of plausibility of neuroscience, et cetera, we could go on, have brought scientists to a point where it cannot be, materialism cannot be scientifically sustained as a credible theory. And once you open up your scientific understanding to the realization that all is consciousness, and the consciousness is non-local, magic becomes the actual technology that is the truth of the law of the unfoldment of reality. It comes as a result of a unified field of consciousness. And therefore, we have to recognize that we are in the presence of a whole that actually has no parts, even though it might seem to have parts because you identify each body as a different part. But in fact, they are simply appearances in a single whole that cannot actually be divided. And that is timeless, intelligent, and has the power of bringing about changes that cannot be predicted by science, cannot be stopped, and which override the egoic will to dominate nature. And so this shift in awareness has both humbled humanity and opened the human intellect again to that power of magic that can only be activated through the surrender of the egoic identity and the opening to the absolute. So there's only one siddha, one maha siddha, who may manifest through or with the help of different bodily vehicles, but the one siddha has infinite numbers of siddhis, and they are producing the magic that no one can any longer deny is the essence of reality. I hope that's helpful.
We have a question from a YouTube user named Strugcat. The question is, don't we need to use mind to some extent to transcend it? I'm here due to searching, which required use of mind to get here.
Yes, of course we have to use mind. But the question is, what level of mind? The only way we're going to get out of the faulty mind of the ego, which is faulty because it has inaccurate beliefs about reality, is to correct those false beliefs using a higher level of mind. And the usual process of psycho-spiritual development is to get to gradually higher and higher levels of intelligence where we're able to correct our frame of reference and eliminate false beliefs and all of the baggage that comes with those false beliefs in terms of emotions, attitudes, and fixations that then prevent the attainment of higher levels of intelligence. By going to those higher levels of mind, we gradually get to the highest level of mind, which is beyond what we now consider to be mind, which is simply limited usually to thought in the form of language or images or mathematics, but not mind in the sense of the intuitive knowing of the infinite and the eternal. But to get to that level of consciousness, that is inherently a part of our being, the ultimate source, in fact, of the being that appears as if it's a bodily entity. And that level of mind then dissolves the need for any of the lower levels. It's like a ladder. Once you climb it, you don't need the ladder anymore, and you remain in that infinite consciousness. Of course it's mind, but now it would be called Buddha mind, or Christ consciousness, or the Tao, or Wuji, or Allah, or given some other name in accord with whatever tradition one has come out of or is related to. But it doesn't require a name at all, and ultimately is beyond any system of metaphysics as well. So therefore, that level of mind is the ultimate freedom of creative intelligence that doesn't need to think because there is already knowledge, but that can translate that knowledge into thoughts when necessary to be transmitted to any consciousnesses, let's say, that are functioning not yet at that level, so they can be raised to that level. Okay?
And the answer to the last question, you talked about magic and synchronicity. It's kind of an occurrence of magic, right? And then getting the joke. And I was actually thinking today, I was curious, what is humor and what is its relationship with magic, or is it related? Because it can feel magical sometimes, I think, when things can turn humorous. And there's many different ways it occurs. But I never really connected the two or thought that they related at all.
Sure. Well, first of all, there are many levels of humor, many kinds of humor, and some egoic kinds of humor are very gross and vulgar. And yeah, I understand, but I'm just trying to tell you that humor exists on a spectrum. And there is humor at every level of the spectrum of consciousness, but it's a different kind of humor. So God's sense of humor is very different from a human sense of humor, a human ego sense of humor. But once we're attuned to that sense of humor, then we find joy in every moment because we can see the workings of that secret intelligence, even in what looks very dark and not humorous at all, very serious indeed. But once one can see that, one can have compassion with those who are suffering and unable to see it, and be able to transmit gradually that same understanding that produces joy rather than suffering. But if one still believes that one is some imperfect being that feels guilt and shame for its past deeds and feels limitation of what it's able to achieve or become, and it still holds on to those limitations, there's very little room for a sense of humor, at least not of a healthy kind, right? So the more that we are open to humor, that's a good barometer of how open we are to the divine. And we will always be able to understand the cosmic joke and realize that the punchline is beauty, is joy, love, the kingdom of heaven. All of that is at the end of a road that usually has been very serious and filled with suffering. But there is that light at the end of the tunnel, and the more that we're able to see it and bring that light into the tunnel, the more that the tunnel itself becomes recognized as the kingdom of heaven. There's no need to wait for some future moment. And it's very humorous, very beautiful when one recognizes that that is indeed the reality that can't be seen by those who are in tunnel vision and only see their own reality tunnel rather than reality as it is, which is not actually a tunnel at all. So it is this infinite within the finite, this paradox of the limited and the unlimited, the immanent and the transcendence. That's the basis of humor. It's the shock of recognition that all along things were totally different than what you believed they were, and they are different in the most beautiful way you could imagine. So when we open to that, then our hearts open to love, and they melt in joy in the recognition of the goodness of that power that is ordaining and unfolding all of this. Okay?
We received a question from a man named Felix, who asks a lot of specific questions about the Sat Yoga community that can be answered by contacting us at retreats@satyoga.org. But he asks if you could speak just a little bit more about the Sat Yoga community.
Anything specific?
There's a lot of specifics, members, if we expect to grow, what our schedule is, things like that. But I think just in general, an overall view of what the community is about.
Well, that's in the hands of the ordainer. So I have no idea how much will grow. That's whoever is called here and who feels that this is their spiritual home. They will come. I have no idea. I'm open to the surprise of the unfoldment. And it's not so much a question of the numbers who can be here in the local space, but the impact that the coherence, the power of healing can have on a global level. And hopefully the community can function as a model that will inspire others to create such communities in other places. So this will hopefully be a hub, but not necessarily the hub in a planetary network of communities that have the intention of raising consciousness to its highest level and living in egolessness. So that's the vision, is an egoless community that operates as a superorganism that invites all who wish to participate at that level to be here, and all who want to leave can leave too. It's free. There's no intention to hold anyone here who doesn't want to be here. So we're not dealing with a cult. We're not dealing with a situation that one has to make some kind of a commitment. In fact, one wouldn't be allowed to until there's a wholehearted realization that this is the life that they are called to, and that it's totally in resonance with the members of the community who are already here. So it'll grow organically, and it will grow as a function of how pure and clear our own energy is, how inviting, how joyous, how much difference there is between the life here and the life out there. And the more that it's seen that this is an incredible life with ongoing learning and development and opportunities to be creative and to not have to deal with having a job and doing all the things you have to do in life out in Kali Yuga. This, to me, is the ideal life one could have, especially in this time period. And it's created as a Noah's Ark because although many are still in denial, the floods are happening. The destructive forces are accelerating as well. So we're having an increase in the darkness and destructive forces of the world, but at the same time now an increase of the forces of light. And it is this that will come to an ultimate crescendo, not that far in the future. So I would say anyone who is considering that they want to actually come here and join the community should do so pretty soon, because the conditions of travel are going to change, the conditions of the global financial system are going to change, and the difficulties that will be involved in getting here and in developing a life here will become more severe and more of a test and a challenge than they are at the current moment. And this can change at any time. The cataclysmic changes that we are witnessing on the planet, including the increase of earthquakes, volcanoes, cyclones, hurricanes, et cetera, epidemics and wars, all of the many horsemen of this apocalyptic time are increasing. And so the more that there's an energy field of love and light and goodness and peace to counterbalance that, the more easily we can shift the world into a new age with the least amount of suffering. But all of these are the birth pangs of this birth of a new civilization, a higher culture, and the death of an old one that has become morbid and unsustainable. So in the context of that, the more that we know and the more that we are willing to surrender to be vehicles of that, the more that we will fit into and want to be in a community like this one. And we want to also be able to help other communities, link with them, share our own hard-earned wisdom, even send people to visit if that's possible, and to create a network of friendships that can help to stabilize and strengthen everyone, wherever they may be, who is on this path of returning to the source. And to know that whether you're in this community physically or not, you can still receive the blessings of those who are and of the source of that power that has created this community and is sustaining it and enabling it to grow. But in terms of how that's going to look, I have no idea. And I'm open to whoever is sent here by that intelligence. And that includes people with families, that includes hopefully developing a university, possibly other levels of school, a possible place for those who are infirm, a clinic, and even a place where people can prepare for death. And be able to die in a very spiritual context and leave the body and go to the light and clear their karma before they do. So we want to have whatever facilities that this power wants to endow us with to be at the service of humanity in this final phase. And that will depend on the donations we receive, and because we depend totally on love offerings and on the donations people make to come to formal retreats, but we are completely at the mercy of that power of goodness, and for that reason we disseminate as much of this information freely as we can, and we understand that there are people who can't come here, and we want to give as much help as possible. No matter where anyone is, which is one reason for this kind of a live stream satsang. But in whatever ways we are learning to be able to function, not only in cyberspace, but also through other means to connect with beings around the world and beyond the planet, we want to create a cosmic community and be true cosmopolitans in a sense that has only been imaginary in the past. And so it's that level of community that we are really joining, that's already here. Okay. Okay.
Well, thank you for that last answer as well, because we had a lot of questions about what your thoughts are about how much time is left between this Kali Yuga and the next stage. We have a question from Danilo from Brazil, who thanks you for your talk on rocketing to cosmic consciousness. It was one of his favorites. He asks that when you spoke of a body of consciousness being able to project different bodies according to the need, as if in a dream, you made him think of Yogananda's realms of consciousness, the causal, astral, and physical. So the question is this planetary transition really an astralization of what we understand as reality? And another question is, what does it mean for a soul to have a deep longing for the astral realm? Dreams, a sense of the eternal? Thank you.
Okay, well, I think Swami Yogananda created a simplified version of what we would call a spectrum of consciousness, a vertical spectrum, right? In which we have the densest, the physical plane level, the less dense, the astral, and then what he's calling the causal as that transcendent dimension of non-objective, formless intelligence at the highest levels. So there are different levels of astralization, not just, it's not just a single level. And it can start with the simple imperience, that we would call it, rather than experience of the sensory level of data. The universe is really simply information, or raw data that the mind turns into information. That then at an astral level, it turns into wisdom, okay? Not just information. But how do you turn it into wisdom? First of all, you're receiving a different level of information through dreams and visions and non-ordinary sources of intuition. You are receiving information that if you have the key to interpret it, you will understand what the mind of God is trying to tell you in advance, precognitively, of what's going to happen, to prepare for it and to change one's attitudes at the denser level so that one is accurately going to encounter whatever one must face at the matrix level, the phenomenal plane, through the heightening of one's consciousness and the bringing of the luminous and less dense into the field of density. So the astral, one who is interested in that is, let's say, being guided by what we would call the epistomophilic drive to know that non-ordinary knowledge that is given in dreams and in visions, and in non-ordinary experiences with plant medicines and psychedelics and all of that. It can come through many ways, but these are glimpses of knowledge that are simply intended to be fuel for achieving a higher level beyond the astral. You don't want to get stuck in the astral, because it's a bardo state. It's not the source of the intelligence. It is already configured by archetypal energies and has both light and dark elements to it, as the Gnostics knew very well long ago. So the astral planes are levels of consciousness to learn from, but you don't want to hang out there, because sooner or later you'll get kicked in the astral level of your being, and you'll realize you've got to rise to that highest level of consciousness that's beyond duality in order to be able to be of service, whether in the astral or in the physical plane.
So preparation for the magic retreats, we started watching the Magical Egypt documentary. And it was the first time I really got a good appreciation of like what symbolic consciousness could or does look like. And then it felt like almost like it was the language of the soul compared to the analytical and smaller language of the ego, in the way it can penetrate you. And so my question is in part, it seems like in order to live in the realm of magic, they have to unite. They can't be two separate things. And so the question would be, how can we, how does that happen? What's the process that facilitates that?
To facilitate what exactly?
The unification of the, let's say, the language of the mind and the language of the soul.
Okay, it's the soul's language is a higher level of mind. It's not different. I think that the first thing one needs to do is to learn the language of dreams by learning to interpret the dreams you get at night, and recognize the way that intelligence of the Atman, which is the spirit, it's actually beyond the soul, speaks to the soul through images and scenarios that are metaphors for that which is taking place in the soul that cannot be directly languaged by the logical mind that's within the ego's frame of reference. So it's a higher level of consciousness. But you see, once you're in that, you realize that the physical phenomenal plane also is a dream, and that what we think is appearing, and as people or as events or as animals, nature itself, whatever we encounter in this plane is not really there except as a metaphor of a level of intelligence and power that it is symbolically enacting. But the world, as I say before, is purely information. And the mind translates it into a phenomenal world. But everyone's world at an ego level is a private world. It's not the world, because the ego is sedimented with private projections based on situations that occurred in childhood, only to itself as an entity. And with those conditionings and those traumas, usually, the ego cannot see beyond its own belief system and its own projections that are repetitions of situations that occurred in the past. And it's afraid to go beyond that box of what it knows, and it gives in to the continual repetition of the same varieties of traumas in slightly different ways. But we are attracted to the same kind of people. We go through the same kind of mistakes. We go through the same roller coaster ride. Within the ego, that consciousness cannot perceive a way out of its own identified labyrinth of reality, because there is no exit from it except to reach the soul consciousness. So the dreams give us information that couldn't ordinarily come to us from outside or even from reading books. And when those bits of information come with very powerful and dramatic affects, as in nightmares and in dreams that are overwhelming in their impact upon us, they open us up to the question of who sent that and what is its meaning. And then we can begin to apply that to all of the symptoms of suffering that we create in the body, or in karma and clashes with other people, or in other events that occur in our lives. And once we realize that nothing happens from outside, but everything is projected from inside, not necessarily from the ego level, but from higher levels, but still they are projections that are meant to teach us in the same way that our night dreams are. From that level of soul consciousness, we are now able to live in the phenomenal plane with a much higher level of understanding and empowerment. But still, as the Egyptian magi, if you will, were able to understand those symbolic forms of the gods and the goddesses, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Set, all of those are expressing the metaphorical conflicts and collusions, engagements, entanglements that exist even at a soul level that must be overcome in order to reach pure spirit. And it's that is the intention of the magic of Egypt. But to use that information to develop a civilization and a culture that can apply the psychotechnology in ways that can sustain culture through time. And you know, Egypt lasted some 40 centuries or more. It's not even known. And it came from an earlier civilization that built those monolithic, remarkable wonders like the pyramids, etc. So we have not just an Egyptian civilization, but Egypt itself is the legacy of that which goes even further into the past, and that ultimately connects us to a level of intelligence that has fallen to that level. And you see how much fallen we are from ancient Egypt. So it gives us the understanding that there is a through line and a connection that can bring us back to God consciousness if we are willing to let go of the false logic of the ego, attain the dream logic of the soul, and then beyond that to the truths that are only bearable and knowable in pure spirit. So the way to unite with that, to answer the question finally, is through love of wisdom, through surrender of the mind to an emptiness that can allow enormous concepts that are greater than the ego can fit into itself to come into place through keeping the mind in meditative silence long enough for an aha experience to come into being that is given by that larger intelligence, that literally expands the mind to a level that will shatter the ego forever. So when we are wholeheartedly desiring soul consciousness, we are also desiring ego death. You can't have one without the other. And so it is that is the obstacle to that unification. When you're not afraid of ego death, then you will be given all of this understanding and the power that goes with it as an act of grace. Okay.
Patricia Summers asks, do we plan our lives before birth, such as the family we're born into?
Depends on which we you're asking. The ego doesn't plan it, and the ego usually doesn't like it, especially in Kali Yuga. And feels like it's a victim of some evil fate. But indeed it is planned, but it's planned by a level of the I, of consciousness, that the ego cannot comprehend. But that is intended to settle the karmic debts made by previous iterations of the ego in other lifetimes that created obligations toward the same souls in their new ego iterations in a later time that would balance the karma of what is the consciousnesses that are functioning at those levels considered to be owing to them or that they are owing to others. So at the end of this yuga, all the debts, all the accounts have to be settled. And so the situations one incarnates into are intended to maximize the opportunity for the settling of the karma and therefore the acceleration of liberation. So even that which looks very nasty and traumatic and dark is actually a blessing and a gift that once those wounds have been healed, one will be able to then be liberated from ego and even from soul back into that supreme light that from which we have come and which we actually still are. So we are not really born. What is born is an icon. Just as in a computer, you create an icon on your desktop, and it might be a folder in which you put a lot of information and all data, documents, etc. That's really all the body is a folder that contains all of that karmic information that will then be used. But the icon is not the reality. The reality is the information itself. It's not even the hardware of the computer. It's just the information, which comes out to both 1 and 0, right? The 0 point of the absolute and the oneness of reality is what's being expressed by all of that information. And once you have reduced it to those final terms, then karma is over and there's no need to produce another icon. Mm-hmm.
Shunya, thank you for all this information. It feels very much like it's expanding the sense of who I think I am. And my question comes from part of what you answered to Parvati on the humor. And there's something that you said about the cosmic joke being this recognition of the paradox of who I think I am and what my life has been about. My perspective of reality is not real, and being able to finally laugh at that joke and really fully feel that laughter. And my question is, what is that yearning? Because it feels like there's always been a part of me that knows that at some point I'm going to recognize that everything that I've thought I was not what it actually was, and recognizing that all along was something so much more. And that yearning, I think, is something that we all have within us, and I want to be able to cultivate that. And I guess my question is, what is that, and how do we cultivate it?
Well, I think you are cultivating it very well, and that's why you're here. You came here in order to cultivate it, and you're doing it, and you're growing very creatively, very beautifully. And so the yearning is actually being fulfilled, but you're pretending not to notice, okay? Because you still don't want to get the joke. Because to get the joke means the death of the ego, and you're still identified enough with the ego and its loyalty to others that you don't want to reveal that you're not who they thought you were either. And the revelation of your light, you're afraid, will be so blinding that other people will feel remorse for never having recognized you. But what you don't know, and that is the real joke, is that it will actually bring bliss to all of those others as well, and their liberation from their projections and their own limitations in their identity. So once you recognize that the act of self-realization is not selfish, but is the most unselfish thing you can do, and the only way you can be of help to everyone else to pop their shells and come out as butterflies and angels, the only way you can do that is by doing it first. And so a moment will come when you'll both consciously recognize that you're pretending you don't yet get the joke, and that there's no need to go on with the pretense, and that it no longer serves you or anyone else. And at that moment, you'll start laughing, and we'll all hear it and see the light that you are shining with, which is already visible. Thank you.
A question from Fla Falloon. Is this life just the dream of my ultimate self? Is its purpose to gain experience? If I am already enlightened, why am I seeking enlightenment?
Well, obviously you're not already enlightened, and that's why you're seeking enlightenment. But it's a different level of the I than the one that's asking that question. And that's the real issue, is the differential. The highest level of consciousness has not yet been embodied. And so there must be a surrender of that part of consciousness that has been embodied and functioning as the operating system of the body. That has to be deleted as a false and limited system of understanding, so that the pure consciousness of the enlightened self can come in and function as an avatar, as a being who is able to transmit that ultimate level of consciousness in the form of love and of healing, because the power of pure presence is the only power that can heal the wounds of those egos who have been hurt by the lack of love, by the false consciousness, the deception, the darkness, the apparent evil that now fills the world. So when you can bring that total goodness, purity, innocence, and presence that is egoless fully into the embodied state, then there will be no more need for a life as an embodied being, but there will also be the opportunity to have a life in a world that is able to manifest all of the magic of that infinite consciousness in a state of total peace and wonder and joy, and with all the stops removed on the power of creativity to produce a paradise. So that's also something worth making one's project.
We have a question from someone named Ergo Sum. Namaste, dear Shunyamurti. I greatly appreciate the work you are doing for the benefit of all beings. My question to you, I believe, is relevant to much of the young men of my generation, the 90s, that are conflicted about the meaning and purpose of our earthly experience. By embracing atheism and the current scientific consensus that our experience is brain-generated, there is a propensity to assert that all meaning, value, and purpose are completely subjective, leading us, as we know, to very unfortunate results. What advice do you have for this generation of young men and women that have difficulty engaging with anything that isn't within the paradigm of modern science? And thank you. May God bless you and all beings that encounter you.
Well, thank you for the question, but I have to say I don't think it's any longer true. I think science has actually, for the most part, caved in to the realization that materialism is not a credible theory, and that consciousness is not generated by the brain. And they have never been able to come up with a plausible mechanism to show how that could be, or to prove that it works by being able to stimulate the brain and know that if I stimulate this particular nerve or synapse or set of synapses, this will produce let's say the appearance of some particular phenomenon, the taste of chocolate, or the appearance of a red ball of light, or whatever. If they could do that, and they could prove that a specific stimulation of a part of the brain would produce certain phenomena, then they might have a case. They haven't been able to do that. They're nowhere close to that. And they don't even have any sense of how they could get close to it, or theoretically, material nerves that are just capable of on and off. They're not capable of any delivery of qualities. They would not know how it could be theoretically, or even where in the brain perceptions like that could occur. So the tide has turned. And there's, in particular, I found a very popular figure who is now giving talks everywhere. He's a cognitive scientist named Donald Hoffman, who I think is now representing the leading edge of neuroscience and cognitive sciences in general, who says, no, that theory has been debunked, and that science now must move on to be able to mathematically theorize from the idealistic position, not from the materialistic one, to start from consciousness and then see how consciousness transmits and transduces elements in the brain to be able to accommodate with the motor and the other sensory organs to produce the phenomena of consciousness, but that they do not and cannot be claimed to be produced in the brain or even experienced in the brain. Consciousness is not able to be localized. So again, I think if you remain current with neuroscience and of course with quantum physics, and read people like Henry Stapp and Goswami and a whole long list of others, going back to Max Planck himself, that quantum physics recognizes that this is a dream, and that consciousness is the power that governs and produces all the others. So I think what you have learned in school, I agree, is what you expressed. But the schools have indoctrinated people into a theory or set of theories, including Darwinian evolution, that have been intended to produce that kind of hopelessness and a sense of the randomness and meaninglessness of life. But it's clearly not the case, and we're coming out of that brainwashing now pretty quickly if one is willing to look in more alternative forms of information. But I think it's of great importance now. I don't know why he said men only, because in this case, men and women equally are inflicted with these same responses and attitudes from the educational system, but that we now have clearly a mission and a purpose in bringing about a spiritual revolution in which consciousness is not only recognized as the supreme power, but we learn how to master the use of consciousness so that we can create a new psychotechnology that eliminates the need for the current types of technology that we have become dependent on. But again, not at the ego level. It will require reaching that level of intelligence that is that infinite cosmic consciousness. So to me, this is a moment of great revolutionary possibility that didn't exist before, and a possibility of a renaissance of our creative potentials that we have never been able to manifest before, because we have global communication. This is proof of it. And we have an ability to act globally as well as locally to facilitate the creation of a new planetary culture that dispenses with all of those false beliefs of scientistic but not scientific credibility. Okay. We're getting close to the end. So if anyone here has any questions, don't be shy. Okay.
Lewis Oakwood asks, is the word am in the phrase I am the expression as the world of appearance of I?
Not necessarily. I think if you're talking about the great I am, then you're talking am meaning the first person of being, right? The infinitive is being. what is real being? Being is opposed to appearance. Being is what is real. Appearance is what is temporary and therefore has only at best a relative reality. But I would say the amness actually is the rootedness in that being which is changeless. It's not becoming. In other words, it's beyond time and space and change, and beyond the concepts of matter and energy and difference. And so it is that I amness is the signifier of the transcendent presence, not of any appearance.
In your first words in the teaching today, you mentioned at a certain point that one has to learn to internalize the power of the Supreme Presence. So you guided us through a meditation where we were able to touch upon that presence in one way or another, or one level or another. And what I find is that, yes, in meditation, when one is dedicated to it, one touches on that presence, one can keep, let's say, hold a note. But how do you internalize it so that you don't lose that connection?
Mm-hmm. You realize you are that note. You don't just reach it and touch it. You are the sound of silence. You are the sound of the infinite presence, right? That vibrational frequency. So the more that you contain it in meditation for longer and longer periods, and your body resonates with it, and your mind is filled with that frequency and that intelligence and love in your heart, the more that your vehicle becomes united in love with that source, the more that you will vibrate at every level with that resonance, even if it's at different octaves, let's say, body, mind, soul, spirit, etc. But they will all be in resonance, and you will produce a chord, a magical chord that brings anyone who hears it or feels the vibration into God consciousness. Okay? But to do that, one must have arrived at the level that the ancient yogis called being a prasadi. Okay? And this is a very important concept. Everybody knows about prasad, right? This is what in ordinary types of relationships, let's say between a guru and a chela or a sadhak in a sangha, the prasad can be either a gift that you give to the guru in order to create a relationship and ask to be taught, or it can be a gift. Usually it's of food in both cases, of fruits, but it can also be of something that was prepared, a sweet usually, that is given as prasad. And so these represent the two levels. If one is a prasadi, it means one is offering oneself totally to God, literally as the food of God. Take my body, take my mind, take my heart, take my will, my energy. I belong to you. I am yours. Do with me as you will. It's that level of offering to the power of the Supreme Presence that you cannot control, that you must give yourself to and trust and allow to fill you and move you, literally and metaphorically. When you are the prasad that is offered to God, then God will offer you as prasad to the world, okay? And you will be that sweetness that brings others to a state of bliss and to realization of that supreme light and love that is what is real. So it requires that level of goodness, of wholeheartedness, of commitment, of swaha, total giving without ever thinking, maybe I should take back some of what I gave. No, it's total and complete. And then the ego is gone. And what comes is simply the beauty of Satchidananda, that infinite intelligence and presence shines through you. Okay? So it's very easy, but there has to be that willingness to give everything you are and have to to that one who knows how to make use of it and who will digest you into the glory of the supreme light. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
That whole process you just described kind of sounds a lot like the Catholic Mass and the Eucharist.
Mm-hmm, sure.
It's kind of the same.
Yeah, except you don't need a wafer. And you don't need to believe that this happened to somebody 2,000 years ago or whatever. It's your reality. You are the Christ self now, and you must go through this, get off of the cross of your crucifixion and offer yourself, and you will be lifted up into that light also.
Is that what, because they call that, is it transubstantiation?
Mm-hmm, that's right.
That's what that is?
Mm-hmm.
Or what it is supposed to be?
Sure. Or in that earlier question, astralization and then into the ultimate cause of all that is. Time for one more question. Go for it.
All right, this one's about the internet. Actually, it comes from Zeladon65. What is the relevance of having universal access to knowledge vis-a-vis the internet, while there is at the same time false knowledge on the internet? Is it improving our ability to access knowledge, or is it hindering it?
It depends how one uses it. Of course, there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation, but there's also a lot of good information, and if you have a discerning intellect, your buddhi is open and functioning, then you will be able to tell, and you'll be able to connect the dots of a lot wider database than you might have had otherwise. And for those who don't have extensive libraries full of wisdom at their beck and call, then having it available on the internet, I think, is an extraordinary benefit. But again, it has to be used properly, and there are all too many people who misuse the internet and will go to porn sites or waste their time in other vanity pursuits on Facebook or whatever, and have no interest in using this tool for what it can really potentially give us. But if we are dedicated to that use, then I think this is indeed a God-given a gift to enable us to connect globally in a way we haven't been able to do in recent history, prior to Tesla and the electrical revolution and all of that came as a result. So this is something definitely that we should take advantage of, but with a great deal of self-control and restraint and discipline, and focus on what it's really for, and what would be the highest use of this tool. Okay. Any last burning question before we adjourn? Yes.
It's about magic. How would you define magic? Is it our thoughts because what we think we become?
It depends on the power that you can put into your thoughts, okay? And the truthfulness of those thoughts, and the love that you put into those thoughts, okay? So magic is produced by a thought that represents the truth of your being, and that is able to transmit it, not just through words or even through actions, but through the being. Your very being manifests through a body that is actually made of thought, right? All of your being is consciousness. So it's not just the linguistic thoughts that you have in your mind that are involved in magic. It's the archetype of thought. It's the thought of thought itself that has to come through. That ultimate thought that is the revelation of the real, when that comes through, then what happens is it is reflected as a magical world. And the world is simply a reflection of thought, and itself a thought, okay? So it is That kind of white magic, however, can only be produced when you are in the clear awareness of who you really are, not filtered by identifications with body and past history and belief systems. And when there is no fear and no desire, which are also thoughts that will interfere with and cling on to any other thoughts that you produce, and therefore contaminate them. And so this, unfortunately, what this leads to is another kind of magic, but it's more of a black magic, in which one can curse oneself through self-attacking thoughts, or thoughts that are fearful or afraid to express myself because others might not appreciate or like me if I do. Those kinds of things can actually produce the very outcome that they fear. And then one will live in a world in which your own fearful thoughts, whether actually spoken or just thought in your own mind, are given back to you in the form of a world that has no magic, or only a negative kind of magic. So if you want to produce the magic that brings joy and love and healing, it has to come from that place within you that is already healed. Always already healed, because never wounded, never identified with the body, never went through suffering. And that part of you is your spirit, your pure spirit. And when you bring that fully in, the thoughts that will emerge from your pure spirit will change the world in the most beautiful way that your ego can't even imagine. Okay. All right, I hope that this has been helpful to everyone, and that we can use this kind of a forum for our ongoing development and recognition of our unity and our true nature as beings of light and of love and formless presence, and that we can remain in this state, whether there's a formal satsang event or not, and recognize that we don't have to pretend any longer that we're anything less than a manifestation of the supreme beingness. Namaste. Namaste. Namaste to everyone. Okay.